Hello and welcome. My name is Barry Canty, SVP of Marketing at ibex, and I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Today, our topic is 4 ways to manage rising cost and performance pressures across your BPO partners. We hope today's conversation will provide you with useful advice regarding how to ensure your CX programs remain successful despite the many challenges of this current economic environment. I'm excited to have 2 members of the ibex team with me today. First up is Jaime Vergara, SVP of Operations of Cala Operations at ibex. How's it going today, Jaime?
Hello, Barry. It's going very well. Thank you for having me today.
Awesome. Excited that you're here. Next up is Henry Bermudez, VP of Operations and Country Manager at ibex of our Nicaragua geo. Hey, Henry.
Hello, Barry. Doing good. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, awesome. And this is the first time I think we've had you both together on a webinar. So looking forward to the presentation and hoping we can provide some good information for our audience. Just really quickly, a few housekeeping items. For those of you who are unfamiliar with ibex, we are a tech-driven BPO delivering CX solutions for many of the top brands in the world. We have a network of over 34 nearshore, offshore, and onshore locations, and we have a team of over 30,000 CX professionals. Before we jump into the content, just to remind you, please submit your questions throughout the presentation. We'll be providing some written responses via the Q&A button there in your interface. We also had a few questions that were submitted during registration, and so we'll try to get to those. And the recording will be shared with everyone who registered for the webinar. So please be on the lookout for that to rewatch again or to share with your colleagues. All right, guys, let's go ahead and jump in. Either one of you can jump on this first one. Can you please give us an overview of the many challenges, and you could maybe focus on the most important challenges that contact centers are facing and how that puts pressure on CX programs?
Absolutely, Barry. So I guess I'll start, Jaime Vergara. If you look at the last couple of years, if we've transitioned out of the pandemic in the last 6 months, and as we navigated through the economic and political climate that the pandemic caused on the operating countries where a lot of the BPO functions have worked, there's been a turnoff to a new realism or a new environment that it's impacting pretty much cross global geo, and perhaps a little bit more centralized in the LATAM and Cala market, as a lot of the business has transitioned off APAC into this region, right? I tend to divide it within 4 different areas, right? The first is logistics and build out costs, right? Obviously, with the supply chain crisis that occurred over the last couple of years, the cost of goods has gone up. The long term of shipping and planning for strategic delivery of items has become a much larger cycle. And then if you look at the cost of goods itself, because of the inflationary pricing of both labor and service, it's made the cost of certain items that have to be constructed and built out go up, right? The second one, I would say, is for sure salaries, right? If you look at the cost of living in most of the main world countries, as well as the third world countries, there's been a pretty significant increase in the comparison to the dollar and the euro, as these currencies were depreciated due to lack of tourism and funding moving into the economies with the lockdowns that entailed. And then, of course, there's been a pretty significant competitive challenge from a labor perspective, as a lot of that business moved off APAC into LATAM, and everybody started competing for similar talent within the existing regions, right? Third item would be the higher services cost, mostly focused on electricity and transportation. The macroeconomic and political events going on, in Eastern Europe have definitely made it more difficult to guarantee lower cost of service, the increasing price of oil, and for especially those countries that don't have a very clear green economic energy footprint, it's made it a lot harder to maintain and distribute energy across the network. With finally going into the competition, into the market, right? The rise of work from home in geos that did not have it before, and the competition that's created, fighting for talent with the capacity and the availability to provide those services.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Jaime. Henry, any thoughts on the
Yeah,
topic?
I mean, I absolutely agree with Jaime in that sense. I'll get it, a little more granular as far as specs within compensation, right? I think one of the costs that we also see or we face is staying competitive within, different service providers, or call that BPO, to hire the ideal candidate and profile is the right one for the demand behind the growth or the expansion, right? So that's definitely one. The second one that comes to mind will definitely be transportation logistics. As Jaime was mentioning, we have vastly diverse, a well-rounded redundancy plan to, have agents in center versus our work at home platform, right? So when we look at the division of both, if you have an ideal selection process as far as filtering the right folks, or how they get selected, obviously having the buy-in from the partner that you're working with, that enables also to drive better cost management, because you're also expanding on performance with work at home personnel, right? But definitely those two, that I wanted to mention, because we do see that in nearshore a lot more often than not. So it's definitely very well blended into what Jaime was mentioning in the first four.
Awesome. And Henry, I'm glad you mentioned work at home. We had a question come in from one of our registrants before the webinar, and the question was around cost savings for work at home agents versus in-center agents. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the main difference between cost savings, work at home or in center, will definitely be transportation, meals, and also any hiring costs to, set alone the hiring stage or the profile, how that blends in very well. We in ibex, we do a very good job in the sense of how we select our personnel, how we partner with our vendors, in the sense of what's an ideal criteria for them. But immediately, those are the three main ones that you will see cost reduction. And even more so if they have a maximized performance, because, immediately what you will see is you don't have to invest in transportation. You don't have to invest as much on meals, because all that's a benefit for an in-center staff member, right? But also utilities, right? So you free up a seat, you can actually foster more on, maximizing hours or productivity, which blends in very well between, what's the main difference between work at home or in-center approaches as far as, cost reduction or performance maximization.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Jaime, anything you want to add before we jump to a different topic?
Absolutely right. And that's really the partnership with our clients and strategic partners that makes the difference, right? If you look at the ibex position in nearshore in 2019, we were 100% work on site. If you look at peak pandemic, we were almost 50-50. Post pandemic, we've transitioned in almost a 70-30 model. And the main driver behind that has been to be able to balance the inflationary costs, to be able to provide the same experience and cost to our partners without having to pass a lot of the market costs onto them.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's jump to our next topic, and it's around diversifying languages. In your experience, when brands are looking to diversify languages or diversify offerings within a particular language, what's the best approach, and how should they look to work with BPO? Henry, I'll come to you for this one first.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the best approaches, identifying what's the right profile, what also the skill sets that go behind that, right? We have a very solidified recruitment process in the sense of how we scan ideal candidates and all the scanning that they go through as far as, being able to capture that ideal candidate for whatever demand or growth or expansion that we have, right? As far as languages, it's also important to understand the type of interactions that they're going to have with certain specific customers and the skill sets that go behind that interaction. Call that customer service, call that troubleshooting, call that, tech support or whatnot. But, that definitely helps out when you have an ideal job description, so you can assess exactly where you want to go to.
Awesome. No, thank you. And Jaime, what's your take?
The way I look at LATAM, right, and one of the advantages is that it is a language hub utilized for cross-skilling across to be able to provide services to both Europe and in North America, right? We normally go first to market with bilingual agents centered on the English skill set, whether that's voice or non-voice, just because it's a proof of concept to the partners that you can provide the same experience, better quality at a lower cost within the same requirements. From that point onwards, we then target specified large-scale languages, primarily Spanish, of course. Other people do Portuguese in Brazil, right? Where you can provide ultimate, indefinite, large-scale services at a bit of a lower cost without having to pay that bilingual premium. And that from that point onwards, then we build the language hubs, which are smaller scale, but allowed for multi-language support for geos that normally do not require a lot of transactions being handled, right? And that way you provide primary offerings for the partner, as well as cover niche markets that you would otherwise have to engage in a lot of cost on to provide onshore services for.
Awesome. Awesome. You know, a quick question, something that just popped in my mind. You both have referenced during the conversation the importance of working with clients and prospects to build out profiles. If you could offer a few tips, kind of some best practices when brands are thinking about how to work with BPO partners, specifically on building out those profiles for recruitment, what are some top tips you would provide?
I can take a stab at that one to begin with. One that comes to mind would definitely be reviewing the training curricula, and also the tenureship belt buckle behind the candidates that we work with, right? I'll give you an example. If you hire an agent today with a specific profile and that program expands to a year, that doesn't necessarily mean that the same skill sets remain the same, right? So one of the things that we do as an operating company is we constantly review how our quartile management is evolving. You know, if used to be a new hire 6 months ago, that agent X 6 months later potentially is a top performer. So it's always ideal to reevaluate them every 3 months. You share those details with the recruitment team, you share those details with the training team, you assess the training curricula, and you put all that together, you will have a much better idea of where that old agent is now an ideal agent to hire for in the future, right? So that is one of the best ways that we can actually partner with our partners in the sense of, capturing the best job description or best job profile for that ideal candidate or agent, if you want to call it.
That's great. That's great. That's a good tip. Jaime, anything for you? Any additional tips?
No, I think the key part is the complexity studies, right? As you're trying to map out the requirements that are going to make a successful agent experience and a successful customer experience, independent of the skill set, which is, it can be tech support, sales, customer service, transactional compliance, it's regardless. Being able to do a proper complexity study to be able to determine what the right profile and background of the agents is going to be is going to determine success. One of the most common mistakes that we see is for first-time outsourcers when they're moving out of U.S. onshore markets in captive centers is that there's a lot of tribal knowledge that it's not designated or skilled or what we would say higher education enablement that's tied to intercompany knowledge, past experience, getting shifted on. And a lot of that is hard to analyze and then determine value for, right? And so being able to do a proper deep dive, analyze exactly what's going to make an agent successful and determine the skill set requirement will set you a long path on towards a successful deployment.
Great. That's great. No, thank you so much. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about cost per interaction. Obviously, the need to keep cost per interaction low is top of mind for everyone. But in your opinion, what's the best way to do it without having a negative impact on performance?
Sure. I'll take that one if that's okay, Henry. From my standpoint, I look at four things, right? Number one is identifying the right market. And sometimes we have a little bit of our own bias that gets in the way, right? And I always look at Jamaica, one of the markets that ibex operates. Everybody wants to come to Jamaica. They've been to the beach. They've been to the all-inclusive. They got a chance to enjoy, and it's a great experience to have, right? However, if you are looking for a Spanish-speaking agent, Jamaica is not the right market for you because it's a primary native English market with 3 million native speakers, right? And so I think identifying the right market for the skill set that you want is the first step to guaranteeing that the cost of service is going to align to your expectations. If you are looking for a skill in a market that is not large scale, you're going to have to pay a premium for it. And unfortunately, then that is going to impact the pocket of you as a partner, right? Number two is identifying the right provider, right? One of the most common mistakes is if you're used to working with somebody who specializes in customer service, for example, and then you're expanding into a new vertical within your company that's going to do digital marketing services, and they don't have any experience on it, the reality is you're going to get a biased pricing or a non-accurate solution that might not properly reflect all the costs and intricacies required to be successful, which usually ends up with two outcomes, right? Either, hey, after a while, we've evaluated, we got to raise your price because what we thought we were going to need to do doesn't really align with your expectations. Or option two, we're not successful because we've not brought in the right level of talent and requirement because we were unable to analyze what your needs were going to be, right? Then you go into the third step, right? Which is the workforce management, right? So you have the right support, teams, and skill set to be successful. And it's not just operations, even though those are the guys that are on this call, right? There is a whole myriad of departments that go all the way from HR to WFM to quality that will determine the level of inputs and feedback that you receive and will guarantee a high level of success in your delivery. Once you get all of that down, then we go into the last phase, which is business insights, right? It's not just about delivering on commitments, it's also about adding value. And from my experience, the business insights and quality investment departments are the ones that are going to be able to analyze and help provide feedback long-term that are going to allow you to pivot strategies, whether on the customer saving end, on the transactional end, that will result in cost savings in the long run, far ahead of the medium labor arbitrage that one looks at originally when performing outsourcing services.
No, that's great. That's great. You want to add anything to that, Henry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, tailgating into what Jaime was mentioning, I'll mention a few things as far as actual KPI management, right? So I think it's super important also to setting up the right guardrails to protect the minimum and maximums of expectation setting when it comes to what's the expected goal, right? What does that mean as far as setting up guardrails? Also, efficiency delivery. So, I mean, if you don't have the right synergy, as Jaime was mentioning, hiring the right people, assessing the right portfolio to, attack or actually deploy an action plan with the right set of leadership, then you're not going to have the results as far as, delivering the service that you are inquiring, right? So data analytics, BI, that's important. But once you go after that stage, it's time to pretty much walk the talk and show like exactly what that means as far as results, right? So setting up the right guardrails and making sure that you stay efficient within KPI management is super important.
Thank you. Thank you. And now might be a good time to pause again for a question that we received from a webinar registrant. Question for either one of you. It is, do you have any advice about the best way to identify the ideal geography for a line of business?
Sure, I'll take that. I think there's two pretty much systemic approaches that most people follow, right? We have some partners that engage with external consultants that specialize in that particular function or business that are able to provide a large degree of experience and knowledge in the market towards high success in those profiles, right? We have a lot of partners that we've worked through over the years that told us, hey, the reason I'm reaching out to you is because the eminence of knowledge within this department had a proven track record and you were one of the recommendations, right? The second phase is to leverage your business development POC in a successful way, right? From my experience, the more information you provide to the business development POCs that you're engaging with, the better and more accurate solution that they're going to be able to recommend to you in the long term, from both a pricing perspective, as Henry was mentioning, a KPI and performance perspective, and even from a synergy standpoint, right? Because if you identify providers that have a knowledge and experience within that segment, then you can cross-populate some of those global learnings that then they can apply to your business to help rocket power that service delivery, so to speak.
Great. No, thanks. And we actually have our first live question come in. Thank you. And please continue to submit questions. This question that just came in, and I'll just go to you first with it, Henry. For a brand seeking a nearshore outsourcer to optimize CX cost and performance, what are some of the red flags they should look out for, and also some of the positive traits they should look out for in a partner?
Yeah. So I think red flags to consider will be, do they have the experience belt buckle as far as managing that type of business, right? Number two will definitely be how efficient are they operating within that type of business model. And I will probably say number three is what has been their overall service delivery and expansion post start time, right? Reason I'm mentioning those three is because all of them speak to each other. But at the same time, you measure efficiency, you measure preparedness, you measure work was done the most adequate way, but at the same time, if you're delivering in the most efficient way, right? As far as considering what can drive costs or how you manage that, it's all about like doing the right case study, making sure you have the right backbone to understand how to drive that and make sure that, you deliver on results.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And again, thanks for the question. Please continue to submit. Most of our responses will be written responses, but if there's enough time at the end, Jaime and Henry will do some live responding. Let's jump to another topic. The topic is universal agents. Very popular, hot trending topic. You see it on everyone's 2023 CX trends list. Can either of you first explain what the universal agent is to those who are not aware, and then speak about how universal agents can benefit particular CX programs?
If you don't mind, Jaime, I can start.
Absolutely.
Cool. So the way I see universal agents is I see them as super agents. You can go from basic problem solving to troubleshooting, even rolling up into sales, right? It's super important because you build redundancy and you diversify your portfolio within super agents or universal agents. One of the key things to consider is what is the right timeline to move from step A to B or even C. But at the same time, what are you considering as far as assessments to make sure that, that movement or that progression or career progression, if you want to call it, how is that going to take full effect, right? One of the things that we focus in as a company is, do you have the right upskill training, right? Have you identified the right personnel? What type of training and development has evolved to making sure that you select the right personnel? But, overall, when you look at some of the programs that we handle in nearshore, which we have quite a few, one of the things that we've been able to identify is that once they reach that peak at the highest level of being a universal agent, they give you solid results because you have built a solid redundancy and you can control unexpected events. Some of the things that partners also consider is if you don't have the experience belt buckle within universal agents, how can you service me better to make sure that my business has a continuous plan, right? And when you have a one lane type of mentality approach, then you pretty much hit a wall and then you limit yourself in different angles, right? Jaime, I'm not sure if you want to invest on that one.
Sure. If I were to say the way I look at an universal agent is there's two reasons why you would go that approach, right? One is, and is happening in pretty much every market segment across every channel, as companies invest more in the digital offerings, the blend of communications between the customer and the partners is changing. If you look at the percentage of voice volume, in the 19s, 20s, 2000, 2010s, the percentage of volume changed on voice was, in the 99%, right? If you look at the transition over the last 5 years, that volume is pivoting towards chat and social media interactions, customers reaching out in their own time when it's comfortable for them, and then responding when it's, again, comfortable for them in reactive conversations, right? So the reality is there is a very hard assumption on how is that customer going to reach out? That is constantly changing. So if you have a single channel voiced agent, you're not really going to be able to adapt as quick as that trend continues to migrate, right? So that's one. If you have a universal agent, it lets you adapt to that migration and reach out to the customer whenever they need it, however they want it, and at the time that they prefer, which obviously ends up being a much more positive interaction from a customer experience standpoint, right? The second reason, and this is also another of the trends that we see, is to keep volume load and workload busy, right? We know that certain channels do not have the same level of consistency when it comes to transactions and volumes as other do. We know, however, that they're just as important from a customer interaction standpoint as any other channel, right? And from them, they need to be taken care of just the same, right? So the advantage a universal agent gives you is that in the case of volumes where there is not enough busy work, so to speak, to maintain high agent utilization, you're still able to artificially, through cross-channel movements, be able to guarantee a high utilization, high productivity, and get the proper bang for your buck, right? Now, well, one of the most common mistakes that I see is that, oh, well, based on that, I would like every single one of my agents or responsives or CSAs, customer service advocates, to be universal. The reality is not everybody is as proficient in every skill set as everybody else, right? Me personally, I love basketball. I am also 5'5". As much as I enjoy it, I know I will never play in the NBA, right? That doesn't mean I can't shoot a hoop, sure, right? But if you put me against LeBron, I don't think I'll touch the ball, right? So the reality is you always want to have an expertise and skill set group that defines for an incredible customer experience within the channel that you require at a large scale base.
Got it. No, and great analogy. I think you would touch the ball against LeBron, by the way. Somebody's got to inbound it. But question for you around universal agent just came in. And the question is, which individual skill should we focus on when recruiting universal agents? I think they're asking, is there one skill that you want to optimize for? Knowing that not every skill can be as equally developed. So is there an individual skill that should be focused on for universal agents?
So one of the things that we do from an ibex standpoint, and that's turned out very successful, is we do psychometric profiling of agent results. And what that lets us entail and dive into is what particular skills or requirements is that particular employee going to be more successful at. What we found is that when you look at cross-channel super agents, as Henry mentioned, multitasking and time management become critical skill sets to be successful. The reality is, for most of the offline back office work, they are going to need to stop that through gaps as new interactions come in and learn to prioritize more in an urgency matrix standpoint, what are the areas to focus on immediately. And so being able to do that successfully will definitely lead to a much better customer interaction.
Anything you want to add to that, Henry?
I don't want to take his LeBron spotlight. I think he nailed it.
I guess one more major topic to focus on, one that often comes up when dealing with nearshore environments, and it's the regulatory issue, the regulatory environment in which BPOs operate, in which ibex operates. Can you two speak about how you manage the regulatory environment? Provide some tips, some best practices for our viewers.
Yep, I can start, and then Jaime can reinforce. I would definitely say, Barry, benchmarking time and costs of when you start a business, right? That would be number one. Number two for me will be benchmarking also sector or region, and setting up a public dialogue or private to measure costs and benefits, right, with your team or your operating team. Lastly, I would say balancing out regulations on standards with sustainable development objectives, because I think it's also important. But if you don't have an SOP or the right people to actually do that, then you're going to face some struggles, right? I think Hyman mentioned in the beginning, one of the first question is hiring the right personnel, right? Making sure that they're well developed and have the belt buckle experience to make sure that, everything falls in place. As far as what I would consider as far as optimization or objectives, I will focus on those four.
Any thoughts, Hyman?
Sure. This is a long topic, so I don't know how much time we have, Barry.
Yeah, we have plenty of time. Plenty of time.
Fair enough. That there are certain things that as a company we look for when looking to enter a new market, right? Number one is, as Henry mentioned, benchmarking the sector, the location, the expectation of the industry. But there is a second phase, which is identifying what is your position in the market going to be, right? And when you look at the investment, right, you look at current investment in the market in your industry, you look at the investment that you're projecting in a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year cycle, right? And then you determine, hey, is this a viable strategy? Do we have the cash flow required to make those investments? And does that align with the expectation and ROI that we are seeing? Once you make all those decisions, right, and identify the position that you aspire to take in the market, then you need to identify who are the primary stakeholders that are going to either support your position towards that growth or perhaps detract your position towards that growth, because either from a policy standpoint, a political interest standpoint, a financial interest standpoint, they do not quite align with your vision for that particular market, right? Once you identify the stakeholders, you start looking for institutional support with like-minded individuals that in this case support our industry, which is BPO, and see the benefits that BPO provides to a market. If you look at the LATAM market alone, there's really only 2 industries that provide employee financial level economic class increase of up to 5 tiers within 10 years, and one is banking and the other one is BPO. So the way we look at it is whenever we go to a market, we're improving the life of our employees, we're improving the economy of the market, and we are adding high value to what that country, nation, city, or city-state wants to bring, right? The second phase of that, right, is identifying the benefits that you are going to be able to provide, being able to classically communicate, explanate, and educate on. And then third, transform that into the negative impacts of not providing the right supports, investment, and resources to be successful within that economy, right? If you look at the last, I would say 3 years, it has been a very clear presentation of the markets that were supportive of our industry and were able to be flexible and mobilized versus those that were not, right? You had some locations that during the pandemic had absolute global shutdowns with 24, 48 hours without the possibility of notice or logistical movement, which ended up, in the spirit of frankness, creating absolute mayhem from some of our partners, right? On the other hand, you had other countries that had a very clear vision of the industry, their expectation in their country, how far it could go, and how to reap the benefits of us. And they partnered with the BPO players, ourselves included, into turning those, and I would say hellish situations, into wins that allowed them to grow their industry, grow their employees, and transform their economy, perhaps from a services-oriented economy into an industry and BPO offering economy.
Awesome. That's great. That's great. So it looks like we are going to have time to answer some questions from the audience, and we've already had a few come in. So again, thank you for those who have submitted. Please continue to submit. And guys, unless you have any final thoughts before we jump into Q&A, I think we'll attack some of these questions. Sound good?
Sure, absolutely.
Perfect.
So first question is, can you speak about the improvements in government stability and safety in the regions where you're both in? So whoever wants to jump on that one first.
Okay, I can start for Nicaragua. Obviously in 2018, Nicaragua went through a very specific time lapse of events, right? We had there was a lot of doubtful risks as far as business continuity or whatnot, because of social political unrest, right? But one of the things that we observed was holding a very tight communication alignment with the government was also part of our benefit, in the sense that, for example, we didn't lose any programs, right? In fact, we actually had some growth. One of the things that was experienced in Nicaragua was that, we still continue to have 70% year-over-year growth because of solid communication with them. There was a lot of investments as far as BCP planning. How do we get our personnel at work and at home safely? How do we provide for transportation logistics adequately and, the length of time that it was needed? Because of all those events and how they evolved, Nicaragua itself, at least in LATAM, went from a 1,300 agent footprint to what it is today, 2,600, right? Performance was super well managed. Communication with our partners and vendors was very well adequately, balanced out. There was minimal risk. And, what I'm most proud of, I would say, as far as, the leader for Nick, is that we had minimal to zero personnel or human risk, right? So very solid partnership, very well-rounded communications. And, I think before any KPI, people will always go first. Agent safety will always go first. And, part of our protocols and process in ibex is exactly to live and breathe that in the best way possible in form. So that has obviously helped out as far as or instability and balancing it out. Very well-rounded, right?
I don't know. People will always come first. I like that. Jaime, any thoughts on the question?
I have some, right? Like I think Nicaragua was a very clear experience of doing the right thing the right way that gets you the right result, right? If you look at some of the other geos where ibex operates and where it's growing pretty significantly, like Jamaica and Honduras, one of the key items for us has been partnering with government institutions and security forces on any changes required to our operating hours, our delivery models, even providing feedback from an institutional law perspective on some of the new technologies that are currently being deployed worldwide in order to prevent crime at a global scale, right? And so, something as simple as being able to change schedules to work overnight if you're providing overnight services for Europe, right? And letting the security forces know that, hey, you're going to have a large population of employees that are now going to go home at 1 a.m. And so they can coordinate transport and logistics, ensure that your employees are safe in all environments, makes a very big difference, right? The other part, which is the institutional standpoint, especially as cybercrime and technology continues to develop, we got to help educate a lot of the countries on some of the new developments so they can add them into their laws and they can update their regulations so they can stay at the benchmark of everything that is required in new and developing industries like ours is.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Next question. The person says, I love the concept of a super agent. Can you talk about the cost benefits, if there are any, of universal agents versus traditional agents?
Yep, I can start with that one also, Barry. So 3 come to mind immediately, right? So I would say improvements on transfer rate, improvements on escalation rate, and a well-managed average handle time, right? The reason I mentioned those 3, it's related to what Jaime was mentioning previously, right? If you have diversity and a well-rounded skill set, super agents or universal agents normally are well-rounded when it comes to multitasking. All that blends into the first 3 categories that I actually mentioned, and actually pays off as far as productivity, and definitely cost, right? Because, if AHT goes up, then, you're going to have some jet lag in terms of managing your service level. Escalation goes up, then, we're probably filtering the wrong calls to the wrong department unnecessarily. And same thing with transfers, right? But those will be the 3 that I will mention that it immediately we will be able to see like a direct impact on benefiting from having universal agents.
Absolutely. To Henry's point, right? If you look at an or universal agent model, there is an initial higher investment that if you were looking for a single source channel cost, right? Because you're looking for a triple skill set within that market to be able to reach out to customers in whatever environment they require. However, you then transform that initial investment into a higher ROI with the skill sets that Henry mentioned out. You also are able to artificially create a higher utilization for that employee, which means more productive units come out, whether it is transactional, voice, customer oriented, right? And then what we've also seen is that the curve in skill to proficiency is actually faster, right? Because they're able to identify all of the pain points of the customer in the different life cycle and channel cycles. So they're usually able to correlate and then find solutions at a much faster speed than you would if you were engaging with a single sourced agent, right?
All right, thank you for the question. Looks like we have another one that just came in, and Jaime, I'll come to you for this one. One of our viewers is looking for examples of how a BPO or ibex in particular has partnered with governments.
So I think Jamaica is, for example, a pretty good proof case of the benefits of what that partnership can accomplish, right? If you look at the legislation in the country in 2016, when ibex came in, there were some clear areas of opportunity when it came to cybercrime and cyber fraud prevention, just because historically the country did not have the digital technology and assets in order to engage in that particular service, right? And so what we identified was a possible risk gap that would not allow us to protect our customers' data and information. So we partnered with the legislatory body and the pundits in the cybercrime sphere to come up with recommendations that their director of public policy eventually enabled into a Cybercrime Protection Act that went live 2 years ago and enforced this year, that now dictates and correlates the entire crime prevention task force as well as law enforcement on how to address, prevent, and mitigate that kind of risk, right? And I've got to say personally, I want to thank the government of Jamaica for partnering with us in making those changes so fast and deploying it so quick, and allow us to act on it based on our feedback and experience.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, it's great to hear that governments are willing to partner with BPO. So that's good stuff. Next question has come in. This is going to have to be our final question. The question starts with a statement. The viewer writes, "My company is currently evaluating nearshore outsourcing partners. Can you give us some specific red flags we should look out for when evaluating BPOs?"
I think there are a couple of things that usually stand out. From my experience, as having been, working in Europe, then North America, now LATAM, first is immediate pricing. If somebody provides you information within 24 hours on a new skill set or requirement that you've not engaged with them before, my experience usually says all of the assumptions, data requirements, and necessities have not really been evaluated and engaged in a conscious and productive manner, right? The reality is the more information that you share, the more of an educated guess that we can provide to what will be a successful operation. And that usually takes time and assessment. So it's one of the things that I look out for. Number two, and this one is very important to me, is when there is not a clear leadership identified with a trajectory and experience that's going to be successful for your business, right? Knowledge base takes time. Experience comes with incorrect steps throughout the process, right? And so being able to provide experienced leadership that knows either your segment, your channel, your market, or the requirements that you're aiming for will guarantee a much, much faster path to proficiency than not having those skill sets behind, right? So the other one that I've usually seen is that, right? Hey, we had this one person who did this thing 10 years ago. They're great. They're fantastic. but how does that relate to me? How does his skill set and his knowledge base apply to my business? I think that is one of the key differentiators between a leaned in closed management partner and just a cookie cutter solution for whatever it is you need.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And anything else, guys, before we wrap it up?
Yep, Barry, just going back to the government, I did wanted to, mention one, at least for Nicaragua, right? So recently we've been able to meet with them as far as what's their end goal or objective when it comes to the work at home footprint, right? Around the year 2018, 2019, there was a notification sent out to to all the BPOs as far as having a 30% cap within work at home environment as far as overall footprint. But they have partnered up with ibex in the sense of, one, acknowledging our year-over-year growth because of solid performance, right? And then what's our end goal as far as growth, whether in center or work at home model. So one of the things that we've been partnering to do is, how do we cultivate a true partnership with English institutions so we can vastly improve the English skill set for more agents to be employed, at least in the BPO world, right? And then how do we expand that beyond the capital of Managua and cover a little more ground in Nicaragua with other cities, right? So that has entailed us and given us empowerment to make sure that if we have a vendor that's interested in in-center launches or expansion, they also have the opportunity to do so from a work at home footprint. And, given some of the pointers that we have given out in this session, there is a huge cost benefit in terms of that. So Nicaragua holds one of the biggest scales or percentages as far as work at home. And, this partnership is also empowering us to expand that more some and continue with growth. So that's one of the items that I wanted to mention as far as partnering with the government.
Awesome. Awesome. And I think that's a good place to end it. Henry, Jaime, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights. I hope our audience found them useful. And for the viewers, thank you so much for joining ibex. If you want to learn more about ibex, you can visit us at ibex.co. Once again, thank you and look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Have a good day.